Hello and welcome back to the Mindsets Podcast. This is episode 25. I'm still your host, Angus Cook, but today I'm joined by Charlie, who is immediately going to take over and do an introduction to who he is and why he's here. But you've been a busy man recently, so we've got a lot to cover, but you guys are going to learn a lot from someone who's been doing some pretty extreme things today. So with that being said, do you want to give us a run through of who you are, where you come from and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Charlie Hubbard. I'm 23. I'm from Surrey. Typical. And then, basically over the last 9 months or so, kind of fitness-wise, gone through from a half Ironman through to pretty extreme, quite long-distance ultramarathons. And hopefully today I'll be able to share a few tips or tricks and hopefully provide a few lessons from like my mistakes I've made. It's definitely about preparation and stuff like that. And hopefully the people listening, if they're going to take on any of these challenges, might feel like they can avoid those mistakes by not following the same patterns. But
Sure. So I think it's worth me mentioning, if there's any northern listeners, I'm not against northerners, right? It's just that I'm currently based in the south. That means that I have access to a lot of people that are in the south. If you're northern and you're willing to come down, then do give me a shout. But I will also make the trip up there soon. But you're from Guildford.
I am.
Which is actually pretty close to where I grew up. I didn't like it because I just felt like I was stuck in the middle of nowhere and everything was expensive. But what was your sort of early years and kind of discovery of sport and that sort of thing like?
Yeah, so I went to RGS Guildford, for anyone who knows it. Went there pretty much my whole school life, and I come from a rugby playing background. So growing up, I was rugby obsessed. So like playing at school, played at county, and then played a bit at London Irish for a few years. Really, you know, like many young lads playing rugby, kind of you think, oh, I'd like to one day try and make it pro. Like, obviously it didn't happen, but it was, growing up, it was always about rugby and playing team sports. So definitely the endurance pathway and doing that kind of stuff, a lot of it is you by yourself, like not only the training, but the events. So it's weird to have transitioned from being fully playing team sports, like rugby, for example, and then going into something very different.
One thing that I noticed as well, and we discussed this briefly before, RGS is a school my parents wanted me to go to.
Oh, really? Yeah.
My sister, not my girlfriend, my sister
So how was
my sister went to Guildford High School, which I'm aware have a bit of a sort of close relationship with RGS. I went to do the exam when I was in like year 6 or whatever it is, the entry exam, absolutely messed it up. I also messed up the interview they give. So they asked me as like an 11-year-old, what would you do if we gave you £1 million right now? Liar. Absolute liar. I just said I'd give the whole thing to charity. Who's doing that? You're not allowing a liar into your private school. But one thing that I'd noticed as I was looking around the school is that the sports facilities are amazing, and obviously nestled in the middle of Guildford, where you've got things like Guildford Spectrum, which has got a running track, a swimming pool. Then you've got the park that's also opposite, where there's all the rugby fields and everything like that. Bit of a breeding ground for sports. And then you also have Surrey University, which is where Harlequins train and that sort of thing. How come you ended up at London Irish?
Yeah, so this is a bit of a weird one because I had a lot of some friends now who are currently playing at Quins, but when we were going through the system, all these lads were going to Quins, and obviously, like you just said, naturally, it's 10 minutes from where I live. I used to play at Guildfordians, so the local rugby club there, and it got to, I can't remember what year it was, but basically everyone started pushing out to different clubs. And London Irish have their own amateur club, so it's not part of the academy, it's not like Saracens or Quins or anything, it's just like an amateur club. So I moved there to play, and kind of in my first season got picked up naturally from there to that academy, so then went to play for London Irish. But yeah, every time my poor mum had to drive me an hour and a half to get there. I think we were all thinking Quins is only 10 minutes down the road. But so that's why I ended up there. Slightly weird, but
at academy level, it's one thing that I always noticed as I was getting slightly older and playing rugby. Obviously, having a pint after the game is quite a common thing. Maybe a boat race, maybe more, just the one pint. At academy level, is that still a thing?
So I was, from memory, in the academy from, I think it was like 15 or 14 till 16, 17. So realistically, no one was really like, I know at schools and stuff, like after games, people have a party at the weekend, but like at academy, there wasn't really going on. From my friends who like actually made it, I think, they do enjoy a beer, but obviously going through the academy, and then I believe when you're, you've kind of got given a contract, but you're still trying to push into the first team. Obviously, you're prioritizing trying to get in. So I can't give an honest opinion on what goes on, but it's definitely more serious, like the academy stuff, than when you're playing at a club and people are getting on it after the games and stuff.
Yeah.
And then you go to uni and it's like, it's 50% rugby, 50% drinking, isn't it really?
Definitely is. And so was it around that time that you came to the realization that rugby probably wasn't going to be a professional career for you?
Yeah, so I've always wanted to join the army. So currently I'm serving as a reserve officer, and actually I probably should have said this. I'm about to go to Sandhurst to do the regular commissioning course. So I've been a serving officer for 2 years as a reserve, so like part-time while at university, and now I've finished uni, I'm going to start my regular career. So I've always wanted to join the army, like little lad. It was always like, want to join the army, but playing rugby, you also look at that and go, that would be great. London Irish, when I got dropped, effectively, it was just like, you're not big enough. I'm like a small lad, but size of some people playing, they were like, sorry, we're going to let you go. And it was like out the back door, and that's you. And I was like, fair enough. I wasn't the biggest guy. And that was kind of it with rugby as such. Still carried on playing, but those opportunities as you go up, if you're not in the system, you're kind of, that's you. But some guys I know have managed to get back in, which fair play to them.
Fair enough. I mean, going into looking at the army then, physicality wise, is obviously very different to rugby.
Yeah.
As a reserve, what's the training like?
Yeah, so like being a reserve, you're not there full time. So naturally, a lot of it, the earnest is on you to be fit, physically do your own training, kind of put your own program together. The army do offer programs, but again, everyone's individual, and some things work and some things don't. The biggest thing with reserves though is they have normally careers alongside it, so they're even more keen to be there because they've really got to be doing like a 9 to 5 during the week, and then going at the weekend, instead of doing X, Y, and Z, you're going, I'm going to go on a field exercise for 2 days, be cold, wet, and hungry. It takes a certain type of person to do that on top of their job. So I'd say physically, a lot of them are quite fit because they want to be there even more so than maybe some of the regulars. But again, a lot of the regulars are super fit as well.
Okay, and talking of things going alongside that, and we're going very quickly through. I don't want to ignore your upbringing or anything. We're going quickly through things because you started you became an ambassador for the Oddballs Foundation. My understanding of the Oddballs Foundation isn't going to be as good as yours, obviously, so I'm going to hand that over to you. All I remember that's ingrained in my memory is the logo, because it's very colourful usually. There's a lot of colour around it. Do you want to tell everyone a little bit more about what it actually is? Yeah,
so the Oddballs Foundation is a charity which basically is trying to raise awareness of testicular cancer. So like the signs and symptoms. And then the other big part of it, and probably the reason I wanted to get involved, is it's also helping men talk about uncomfortable things. So not most blokes, but like it's guys don't talk about their balls with each other. Not like, I'm not saying you would normally, but if there's a problem, guys don't speak about it. And there's kind of, most guys would only go to the doctors if there's something wrong downstairs. You know what I mean? Like that is what happens. So the idea of Oddballs is like with those colourful pants is it might get a conversation going and people trying to break down that stigma and taboo around, talking about your balls and going to a GP to get them checked out. So the idea is they have ambassadors who are volunteers. So it's like all unpaid and it's on, you're just giving up your time. And there's about 50 around the country currently, I think. And you basically go into schools and colleges, universities, even places of work around the country. And you're delivering this presentation which educates people on what testicular cancer is, the signs and symptoms, and then kind of what to do about it if you do end up, with signs and symptoms of it. And the guys who are like managing it or run it come from a rugby playing background. So that's how I kind of got to know them. I played in a few of their like charity tournaments they put on. You've probably seen them. And then naturally kind of ended up applying to volunteer as such for them. Okay.
And did some of your, more recent activities, were they part of a fundraising thing, or was that just a personal venture that you started to explore doing some more severe things in terms of fitness?
Yeah. So we like jump ahead slightly. So the idea of Project Extreme Rules, there's no doubt about it. I wanted to push myself and do these events, but for me, always being part of something bigger than yourself. So a higher purpose. So raising money for charity, or if it's in a team, it's working within a team. And like I said, like these ultras, it is just you. There's no like team with you. It's you like taking on the event. but doing it for a reason, like raising money for charity. So like it was for my army unit's benevolent fund, so people hardship and distress, like ex-service people, and then also oddballs felt like really good causes. And again, like people being really supportive, which I'm really thankful for. And so the charities, because in the end, I think we've raised almost $5,000 for the 2 charities. Wow. So yeah,
that's pretty impressive. And so it all started. Was it a sort of drunken decision like usually people make to go, I'm doing a 70.3 Ironman, or was it, part of a plan?
Yeah, so I think I got to the stage where I was doing a lot of training, and I don't even want to say it was training, because one day I'd do like a real conditioning piece, and then it'd be like, bodybuilding style thing, and then it'd be a long run. And it's like, training is like when you got a goal and you're training towards it. That was just like exercise, just doing loads of random stuff. But I was kind of doing it and realizing, you need to start trying to channel it into something you really want to do. And a half Ironman seemed like a good opportunity. So unfortunately, I'd injured like my leg or something at the time. And it was almost, in order to rehab that, I needed to do quite a bit of cycling and swimming. So I was like, right, what would be a good? So I was like, okay, triathlon. But for me, it had to be something, it had to be uncomfortable. It had to be like, oh, am I going to be ready in 2 months to do a half Ironman? But the kind of weird thing was, I hurt my leg. It was like, right, I'm going to book a half Ironman and then a full Ironman the month after. And I had nothing on paper to say like I was going to, you know what I mean? If I told all my friends at the time, oh, that's what I'm doing, they'd be like, mate, like, you haven't even done a triathlon. Like, what are you doing? So I kept both of those pretty under wraps and just went about my training. With Project Extreme Balls, I've been putting on social media and stuff. But with the Ironman, it was like, head down, do the training. Don't listen to anyone else's opinion on whether you can or can't do it. And yeah, it's one of those where I think the biggest thing for me is I plugged those 2 in. So I spent the money, I booked them in, and then it was like, I'm going to execute on it. And it's that degree of backwards planning where it's like, especially before the Ironman being a month after the half, I had slight ankle pain. I'm not saying anything major, but enough where my running was a couple of 5Ks a week. I didn't want to flare it up. But, backwards planning, I was like, okay, I know I'm going to be able to get through the run. It's like with the bike, I'll make up some. So I think the last week I had on the bike, it was like 320K or something. And that's a long way. That's a lot of like biking to do. But again, I was like, the bike's my weak discipline. I come from a more running background. I was like, this is what I need to have hit. So I need to have hit 100K ride that week and 130K ride week. And it was like, once I'd done them, it gave me that confidence of like, you planned it in, you've executed on it, now you're good to go. Probably just rambled about Ironman for a while, but
well, I mean, some of the listeners will recognize, especially from the last episode, Archie and I talked about this 60K ultramarathon week.
Yeah,
my training was absolutely not recommended for that. So 3 to 4 weeks beforehand, Archie asked if I wanted to come along. I just said I'd do the whole thing, absolutely not prepped for that. But I knew, because I'd never run anything like a marathon before, the most I'd run before was 20K. So I knew in order for me to be confident in that I was going to be able to run this whole thing, I needed to run a marathon.
Yeah.
And so one awful Saturday morning, I was like, I'm just going to go and run the distance of a marathon. And it's just to prove to me that I'm ready.
Yeah.
Like, I've put my brain and I've put my body in a horrible position, and I have proven that I can continue. And as a result of that, I know when the 60 kilometers comes around, I know that a degree of the level of pain I'll be in.
Yeah.
And therefore, I know I can just carry on.
Yeah.
Whereas without that, the uncertainty is really what will just sit and play on your mind over and over. So I don't know if it was the same with you. Like, you just needed to, from your backwards planning, tick all the boxes mentally. I've ticked everything I can do preparation-wise. It's now go time.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. And I think something else is people might see someone doing, like, let's say like a pro triathlete do an Ironman and think, oh, it's easy for them. Like, but for them, they're not now pushing to complete. They're pushing to do it in sub 9, sub 8. And it's not, I don't want to say like, obviously if you go for an Ironman with no training, obviously it's going to be super hard. But my point is, everyone's hard is different. So I'm sure if I did another Ironman, it would be equally as hard because I'm then pushing a time. And I'm sure people who do road marathons, it's like your first marathon, you're looking to probably complete or maybe, get whatever time it is. And then you're looking to lower the time. And the training block becomes longer. It's, you're putting in more tempo sessions, these kind of things. So everyone's hard. It just gets scaled at different times.
Genuinely, I would say that based on how that day went, and I might be just misremembering the pain that my body was in, but like, I mean, there's quite a high chance of that. Yeah. I would, tomorrow, if you told me how to do one of these two options, run 60 kilometers again, all in one go, or run a 5K as quickly as possible, I actually think the 60 kilometer is less horrible. Even though the 5 kilometers could be done way quicker, it's just, I just hate it. I hate going for time. And so I also recently just did like a high rocks competition.
Cool, yeah.
And I was burnt out at the end of it. And I remember looking at the clock, and rather than being like, oh, nice, my brain immediately went, that's the slowest you'll ever do that. And it's like, oh no, like now I know what I've set myself in for. And that is, I think, one of the things that with a lot of athletes from different backgrounds is that's how their brain operates. And you are right, time, you're not going for a time in the first place. So it's all like, oh, this is nice, I can get through it. And then all of a sudden it's like, now the game has changed.
Yeah.
And is that why for Project Extreme Balls, it needed to go up at least a couple of notches?
Yeah, I think just on that time thing.
Yeah.
I remember I was in the desert. It was the final day, and unfortunately, day one in the sand dunes, pulled a hip flexor. Not so bad that I had to quit. Became a bit of a grizz job to get, with the marathon the next day, then the 85K, then the marathon, and then a 30K. It was like, you need to pace yourself here. Like, you need to just get through it. And it got to the final day, and it was like half marathon to go. I was like, right, I'm gonna send it. Like, I was like, I need to get to that finish line. I'm done being out here. And again, it was like, I just got a time in my mind. It was like, I have to run the half marathon in this time. And you're thinking, you've done 230, realistically, no one even cares what my Strava's private anyway. So it's like, most of the time it's like, no one's even going to see it.
No one's going to give that kudos.
No one even cares. But in my mind, it's like, if you don't do that, it's not that you fail. Well, it is. You're like, you go to that finish line, you think you've just done Marathon des Sables, and it's still like, yeah, but you didn't do it in the time you said, did you? So I completely understand what you're saying on that front.
But then you moved into, well, you've talked about the desert there. We're going to actually just run it back, because desert wasn't the first thing.
No.
Even though they were quite close together, we'll cover that. You just decided to go off to the Arctic Circle, go and get a bit of a snowy adventuring.
Yeah.
Not very nice one though.
No.
What's the backstory with that?
No. So Project Extreme Balls, it was like, for me, I saw this as my opportunity because I'm about to embark on my regular army career, as I said. So, I'll be busy with work, and almost I'd say this was like a bit of a gap year, like maybe a slightly different gap year to like a normal gap year, but nonetheless, like, got to go to some awesome places, do some awesome things. And I was like, I really want to go and push myself and do something extreme. Granted, it was pretty extreme. And, when I think with all these things, it's like, it's so uncomfortable that you become obsessed with the planning. So the planning for the Arctic, it's not, the training's one thing, but past 50K, you're in the hurt locker. Like,
goes out the way.
You're in the hurt locker, and you're kind of just getting on with it. But the kit and equipment's the thing that actually stops you finishing the race. If you lose your gloves, that's you done. There's no...
Oh yeah, I've never really even thought about that.
So like with the race, there was 13 people who took to that start line, and realistically, if you take to that start line, you probably put some preparation in. There's an interview like you have over Zoom before to check that you're safe enough to do it. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So my point is, all these people who took the start line had something about, they were there, they were keen, they'd prepared, and there was like 8 didn't finish out of the 13.
So wait, only 5 people finished?
Only 5 people finished.
Wow, okay.
And the important thing about that is these 8 people as well, they weren't like quit, like they didn't give up as such because they were just done. There were certain factors, like some of them, it was frostbite, like, well, it's frostbite. You're not going to lose your hands over a race. And with some of them, it's like the first checkpoint was 72K away, and it was just like, you think the Arctic's flat. That's what I thought. It's not. It's, there's rolling hills, and I even looked at the Strava afterwards, and it was 1,000 meters of just gradual incline. And for something like 1,000 meters over 70K is not terrible, but when it's just this gradual incline, it just saps pace. As anyone who's done an ultra will know, gradual inclines almost sometimes worse than just doing a quick climb and over the other side.
Even people that haven't done an ultra, go to the gym and just walk on a treadmill at 1% incline.
Yeah, that's
just annoying.
That's it. That's the best way. You put that way better than I was going to put. And yeah, I think 72k in those kind of conditions, you know, even if you are fit, if you're mentally, you know, not in the right zone, it'd be quite easy to go like, you know what, I've given it a good bash. Even doing 50k, you know, anyone even doing 50k out there, it was like, do you know what I mean? And I even after 50k going to that checkpoint, I think it was, we started at midday. I think to do that 50k, you know, I must have been going, I don't even want to put a time in it because I can't remember. I think that first day maybe took me like 15 hours or something like that. So it's a long time. Didn't do it fast. Slog. Yeah. I think at this point I was probably like 10th out of 13. So I wasn't flying or anything. I was just trudging. And some people basically were just camping out before the checkpoints. So I started overtaking people because they were like, I've had enough for tonight. I'm going to camp out. And I was like, I'm going to get to that checkpoint.
Did you need to get to the checkpoint by a given time?
So that's where the water is.
Oh.
So you're self-sufficient beyond boiling water, and like trying to heat water out there didn't want to try and do it. So I was like, I mean, safety-wise, I was able to do it. But in terms of, I was like, if I can get there, it's all boiled for me, can have a meal, you know, those kind of things. Got to that checkpoint, and I just remember sat there thinking like, I bearing in mind the longest I'd probably done is like a 60k or something. I hadn't done, so it was the longest I'd done. I then, you know, you get to the checkpoint, it's like, right, you go outside, you set up your tent, and it's minus 35. And I'm like sat in my tent, and I'm like, in 2 hours time, I'm getting up to do another 70k. You're like,
that is not a nice feeling. Yeah. I like it when I have got like, I've got to get up for work or something, and I wake up at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Like, got another 3 hours sleep.
Yes.
That's just going to work.
Yeah.
Not, I've got to get up in 2 hours and I've got to do another 70k. That's grim.
So what kind of, I guess, made it worse for me was I was thinking, I've got 2-3 hours. I'm going to have 2-3 hours sleep and then crack on. And I'm just sat there, and I'm like, I wouldn't say I get that cold often, but like, I was just like, I need to start moving. Like, I'm like, you know, your muscles, everything's like freezing up. So I think after an hour or maybe the 2 hours of just trying to shiver around, packed everything up and just cracked on. And that's not me being like, oh, it was literally just because I was so cold. So that takes us into the next day of another 70k or whatever. So started, I think, at 5-6 a.m. I can't remember the exact timings. Kind of merges into one.
I'm not surprised.
Cracked on, and then again it was another 70 odd k, which finished early in the next morning, or maybe that night again, because it gets dark at about, I think it was 7. It kind of all merged. But I just remember again getting into that checkpoint, and at this point you've gone 140k, you haven't slept. The temperature, unfortunately, for most of the race, it's meant to be about minus 25 to minus 35. Really cold, but it's manageable. You can take your gloves off for a few minutes. Like, you do have to warm them back up, but it's possible without getting frostbite. And to undo a flask, to drink, to even put a head torch on, you have to have some dexterity in your hands. Like, you can't with an Arctic mitt. Like, all my food, unfortunately, because it was minus 45, was frozen. All my flasks were frozen. All my spare clothes were frozen. Electronics were frozen. And suddenly it's like, whoa, like, you know what I mean? You can't even stop to drink or eat because it is so cold. If you take your gloves off, you're going to get frostbite. And I think that's where that adrenaline, you're really like, you need to get to those checkpoints now. You can't even try and stop out. Then that second day, that's when people started were really dropping out. So the safety car would go past and you just see like 2 or 3 faces, and then you'd be like, they were like, you know, some of them were behind, but there was a couple of the leaders, like strong leaders doing well, who, you know, they were out the race. Damn. And it's one of those really weird ones in life where you're like, I feel really sorry for them because they, you know, they've obviously prepped and they paid the money, they're here. But part of you's like, I'm still going. You know, these people are really good, experienced. They're gone, and that I like I said, I do feel bad for them. But part of you's like, you're still going, mate. Like, you know what I mean? You're doing something right.
You get a little boost almost.
Yeah, exactly. You're doing something right, and you're still going. And I remember it was a little boost, and then about 20 minutes later, you're like, still trudging along. But yeah, so that was the second. That was into the second night. And again that night it was so cold, so I kind of was like, right, I've got to risk it. I've got to put the head torch on. Like, had to see in the dark, obviously. Turned it on, like, oh, my hands are so cold. Like, look up, and I've turned the side lights on, not the front light. So I spent about 6-7 hours in the dark, kind of walking like this, trying to see through the side lights. And a morale killer. You're just like, you silly boy, like, you silly boy. But again, even doing that for half an hour, I'm like walking along like this, just like, please warm up, and you're thinking, I can't feel this finger, like, you know.
Is that because of the fact that obviously when you've got the gloves on, do you still sweat? And then when you take that off, it's the sweat that gets so cold and basically stays on your hands. So
that's a really good point. So basically, if you have to go at a certain pace where you're not sweating, but obviously you're moving fast enough, and that's a really fine line.
Yeah.
For me, like, I actually didn't find sweating a problem at all. If anything, I was slightly cold, but again, I wasn't moving super fast. So, but with the hands, it was just literally, you take your gloves off, and there's a wind chill factor as well. So as anyone knows, like if it's sunny and there's windy, you don't feel nearly as hot. And it's the same like in the cold. If it's just cold, it's not too bad. But when that wind's biting your hands and you suddenly put them back in and they're just frozen. And I think the best way to describe the temperature for anyone listening is like the difference between like -25 and -45 would be like 20 degrees in the UK to 0. Like, but when it's negative, it doesn't seem as big a drop. That's a huge drop. So obviously I think that's why there was quite a high DNF rate, because the temperature was really not on side as such or playing ball. Don't know where that's gone.
Well, how are you going from day 3? How many days did it actually take?
Yeah, so you're right. So I got into that checkpoint, and then I think there was like the last 50k or whatever to do. So the whole race took me, I think it was 60 hours, two and a half days.
Okay.
Yeah, 2.5 days. And yeah,
there's some questions that I've got here, and a lot of people that are paying attention to this sort of podcast will be very, very aware, I would assume, of Russ Cook, hardest geezer, who's just finished his ridiculous challenge through Africa. One of the things that I noticed, and one day I would love to ask him about, is I saw him at the marathon last week, running through. He was pacing people. I could be entirely wrong, but to me, it didn't necessarily look like he was having the best time, because you go from being in an environment where it is just you running. And this is something that I imagine not many people have really had the opportunity to do. What is your brain? Where do you go when you're all alone for, 16 hours a day, just trying to move and arguably just trying to survive? Where does the brain go? What are you thinking about?
So I'm not a mathematician, but I'm very good at working out how long I've got left and how quick I need to go and those kind of things. So obviously I think a lot of people, if you're going on a 5k, it's the classic, like the first 2k, you're getting into it. And then you're like, okay, if I run this pace, and you're just thinking about these things, and it just keeps the brain ticking over and time going. Like you said, 16 hours, you can't just do that. But it's weird because I don't know about a lot of people, but like day-to-day life, there's a lot of, I don't want to say trivial stress, but there's things that when you're in a survival situation, you would never even think about. And I think the beauty of being in quite an extreme environment, or even like an Ironman, or even just running, you get quite a lot of mental peace, because your body's just in this like rhythm and you're not really thinking. So when you ask that, I'm sure I was thinking about all sorts of stuff, but the only kind of central thing I had was just one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. And it's a weird one. I think with any sort of like endurance sport like that, when you're really taking yourself to the limit, there's like a factor, like an internal drive I don't think you can describe to someone, but I'm sure anyone who's like really pushed themselves knows that there's something within you that kind of, when it gets really tough, you then, I don't know, you come to your better self. You're really like, okay, I'm going to finish this. Hasn't answered your question, but I think what I'm trying to say is I don't think there's one thing like I get motivated by, let's say, that's family or something.
That's not what I expect. That it's more like what is keeping your brain ticking over. Because I even again, like I go back to those 5Ks, which I think are horrible. The entire time, as much as I'm focusing on, getting and pushing myself to do whatever, the entire time I'm trying to do the maths on like, okay, I know the distance from where I am now to there is that. I know that there's a hill, there's a bit of an incline. How fast do I need to go now? Because I know I'm constantly thinking of that, and my brain doesn't stop doing it. But then I'm interested to know, in those environments, is it the same sort of process that keeps your brain ticking over? Because I can't imagine that you're thinking, oh, I need to make sure I put that thing in the post on Tuesday when I'm back from all of this. Like, that's really not going to be what's there.
Yeah. So I think on what you were saying, it's similar, but you're thinking more like, I need to try and drink something in an hour's time. Where am I going to be? So for example, if you want to eat some food, it's not as simple as like, okay, put into your pocket. It's like, I need to get that down my inner layer to warm it up. Then I need to warm it up within my clothes. So that'll probably take an hour before I can eat that. Do you know what I mean? So it's those kind of factors. Or it's even if you're drinking, it's like you don't want to stop multiple times. It's like trying to tie that in with like if you need to go for a piss, you know, those kind of things. As simple as if I'm going to take my gloves off, I need to put my head torch on, eat, drink, go for a piss, change my hat, because like your balaclavas and hats are like frozen to you. So this lad Paul, you won't mind me saying, was like, when I saw him at the end of the race, unfortunately he didn't finish, but he had like frost kind of bite across his nose, and his beard looked a lot, you know, more trimmed. I was thinking, oh, you groomed yourself up since you finished the race. He's like, nah, mate, they had to shave my beard to get rid of the buff, which was frozen to his face. So like they had to like cut into his beard to get it off because it was so frozen at the time. And like I said, it was like frozen to his nose. So his nose had this like black line going across it.
Damn.
And like he came out and was like showing me his finger where it's like white at the end. I was like,
did you get any frostbite?
So I had like, it wasn't frostbite. It was like basically one of my fingers was numb, and I was a bit concerned it wasn't discolored. And the kind of doctor paramedic out there was like, mate, just see how it goes for a couple of weeks. And yeah, luckily for me, you know, it was fine. But I was thinking at the time, like if I had frostbite from a race, I'd feel, you know, that's hard, because if you use your hands day to day, and that's where the risks become real, because you look around you and people got white thumbs and stuff, and you're like, wow, it's a bit more serious than just going for a run.
Well, I mean, coming into, you know, giving it some time, recovering, warming up, you want to do that slowly. You wouldn't really advise going from like minus 45 to plus 45 in a quick period of time.
Yeah.
But again, you just thought, Project Extreme Balls.
Yeah.
You know, I need to move on. I'll tick that one off. I'll be one of 5 to finish.
Yeah.
That was hard. Let's do something else that's hard. And you went on to do MDS, which my French isn't great, but Marathon Des Sables, I believe. It's a 252 kilometer race through the desert. Yeah. And you took that on how many weeks after?
So I think it's 5 weeks, 5.5 weeks.
So 5.5 weeks between these ultras. Obviously almost opposing terrains.
Yeah.
So prep wise, how on earth do you achieve one in such cold, remote conditions where you're basically by yourself with no available technology? Water's there, but it's frozen. Yeah. To like now you've got the complete opposite going on. What was preparation for that?
So I think the one thing I'd say is the fundamentals are the same. So like the terrain, everything changes, but the fundamental process of you've got to be, I think the main thing I found, even through Ironman, throughout all of them, is you have got to be obsessed with the event. And what I mean by that is you've got to know the ins and outs of what's coming. You've got to research all the kit. So I'll take one for the desert. Everyone gets their shoes gaitered. So like gaiters to block out the sand, because sand's one of the biggest reasons people don't finish is because their feet get shredded, because obviously sand in your shoe is just like sandpaper. So people get their shoes gaitered. So ordinarily I thought, well, how, you know, you just put them on your shoe. Well, no, you've got to have Velcro on it. So it's like people glue them on. It's like, okay, that seems sensible. When it's that hot, glue melts. So you have to get them stitched on at like a cobbler's or whatever. They got to stitch them onto your shoe. And it's like, okay, that's something that a lot of people, you know, I would never have even considered that. And then it's only through research, going through Facebook, looking at blogs and stuff like that, you find out all these bits of information from people. And it's stuff like that, which is the difference between not finishing the race at all. So again, in terms of prep, the physical prep, you know, the Arctic, I tried to be sensible. So like it was ticking over. It wasn't like absolutely smashing myself, but I was more just trying to really understand what am I going to face each day. Again, even on the food, it's like in the Arctic, I was a little bit guilty of it. Where I was like, this seems like the right thing to do, but it's not necessarily the best thing for you. And what I mean by that is when I went to the desert, like everyone's like, you need to take, you know, like gels, like, and, you know, people were taking gels to save weight and they might be taking like energy blocks and stuff like that. I was like, okay, but it's a long time you're out there. So I was like, I'm going to pack sweets and I'm going to pack crisps and I'm going to pack nuts. When you're out there, everyone wanted, you know, sweets, crisps, nuts. No one wants gels. And even I found I didn't even want the few gels I did take. So again, it's just trying to, if you're obsessed by the event you're doing and really focused and you find out as much information and you prepare as best as possible, you're in a lot better position than even people who might be superhuman athletes. Because if a superhuman athlete has sand in their shoes, they've got sand in their shoes. So in terms of that, I think physically, I know, like, obviously not saying it's not hard, but I think the biggest thing is that people maybe underestimate with these kind of events is the kit and equipment preparation. By But I think that's the same for anything in life. In terms of preparing.
Again, one of those things that I'd never even thought about was the fact that, effectively you got sandpaper in your shoe as soon as it gets into it. Did anyone rock up with like just normal shoes?
So I basically, a friend of a friend, met him at the airport. We got in contact before because I didn't know anyone going into MDS, bit of a Billy No mates. Got to the airport and we were like just having the usual, oh, mate, what kit have you got? That kind of thing. And he's like, yeah, so I glued on my gaiters last night. And I was like, oh, like, to be fair, the temperatures weren't like 50 degrees plus. So his glue held and his shoes were good, but you could see he was like, fuck, like, I hope I haven't really messed up here. And he was fine. But again, the amount of people in there for blisters, myself included, don't get me wrong, I still got blisters, but I mean, it was just carnage. Like, I like, for example, I got in from, I think, one of the marathon stages, went to the med centre hoping they would just sort my feet out. And they like, here's a like, what do you call it? Like a syringe needle. You can go and drain your feet. And I'm like, so I've got to like put a needle into my like foot and like drain it of, you know, like the fluid or the blisters. Like, I've never done this before. And it's like, again, when you're tired and, you know, it's like, so you're sat there like sticking it into your heel, like trying to one-handed, you know, draw it out. And again, it's things like that. That's where the real battle is, because you're sat there like trying to drain this blister, going like, I've got to then strap it up, you know, get some food down me, and then we're out again. Again, yeah, I'd say those are the bits I remember more so being hard than necessarily the running.
Because in that, I mean, I've watched the trailers of the race and everything like that. It does seem to be that there are opportunities to run more so than there might have been in the Arctic, but there's also a lot more people competing. In terms of, as a result of that, the competitiveness, is there a bit more competitiveness within that environment because there are more people around, or does it actually just get spaced out and you're on your own again?
Yeah, so I think going into any of these, like most people are competitive. I'm a very competitive person, but within 5-10K of the Arctic, I was like, right, this is actually just about finishing. And it was with the desert, like kind of 30K in, like I said, I pulled my hip right near the end of the first day. And up till then, I was like, right, where am I in the pack? You know, and then I was like, right, chill out, mate. Like, you need to just focus on finishing. Don't be an idiot. A lot of people are, you know, some absolutely superhuman people going there who are like there to win it, and fair play to them because they're really strong. But, you know, like you said with the Arctic, you're dragging this 40-kilo bulk. So run, you know, no one's going to, well, some people do. I wasn't running up like a 1-2% incline with 40 kilos. Like, you know, when you got 200K to do like non-stop, I didn't do it. With the desert, like because it's staged, you do have more recovery time. So, you know, you can run a lot more of it. Inclines, like, I don't know if you saw in the desert, I mean, it's not flat again. It's like these jebbles, which are, you know, on one of them, you had to have like a rope to actually go down. It was so steep. It was like, blimey. They put that on the long day, which was really good. So,
of course they would do.
Of course they did.
So with the stages, this is one thing that I found quite interesting when I was reading up on the race a little bit. They're actually quite different in terms of length. I mean, based on the period of time, you would always assume that the longest is going to be the hardest. But depending on when that is in the week of the event, was there a particularly memorable stage that was like, God, I'm not looking forward to this one?
Yeah. So before I went in, the long stage was always going to be brutal. But it's knowing you got to do that, then get up and do a marathon. So for me, it was like stage 4, which was after the long day. And I was like, that's going to be a long day. Because actually, by that point, you're almost halfway through. So once you've done that day, like stage 4, I think you've got 50K to go. So 200K done. So well over halfway, sorry. But that stage 4 is a long day because you're knackered. And I think the biggest thing is it's, you know, I haven't got a huge appetite at home, but I think I burnt 35,000 calories across the week, like going off smart data, 19. So, you know, it's like a 16,000 calorie deficit, which that's a lot of calories like you're missing out on, especially when you're getting up and going again. Like you can, you know, if you went and did a marathon and you didn't eat anything, like, or you ate, you know, like a small meal and woke up the next day and went again, you'd feel the just depletion in the body. So again, by stage 4, that 85K, you are depleted. And I think most people would agree it's a mental game then. It's
so with that, because you mentioned that you put like sweets and nuts and that sort of thing along, are you given any other form of meal, or are you just relying on what you've brought?
So you literally get off the plane. I think you get given a lunch, but it was like a bread roll and a can of tuna. and an orange juice. So it wasn't the ideal.
I'd be fucked. I don't even like tuna very much.
Well, I ate the baguette and the orange juice, but I was like, canned tuna. I was like, I might leave that one. And then as soon as you're into the desert that evening, it's self-sufficient. So you've got that evening, the whole next day before the race where they're doing checks and stuff, and it's self-sufficient. So you're just eating whatever you brought. And then it's into it, again, self-sufficient for the whole week until you finish. No meals or anything. The only thing they give you is water. And that's it.
Okay.
So if you want electrolytes, salt tablets, you bring and you carry everything. So every night, you roll your mat up or whatever you slept on the sleeping bag, everything's away, you carry it all for the day, and then you come back in and, eat your meals and stuff. But I think it's weird though, because I was actually saw a mate for coffee today, and we were having a chat about it, and I was saying, I think it was Johnny Davis did like the length of the tube, and I saw that. But running 250k around London, if I said you got to do 550ks, to me that almost seems like mentally it's almost harder. But like to go out to the desert, you're almost prepared. You're like, I'm going into this hostile environment. It's like you get this adrenaline, like real, okay, I'm self-sufficient. I'm just trudging around the desert.
See, I think that's really a really interesting take. And I wonder if anyone else listening to this agrees with me, because you saying that, I can appreciate that from your point of view, because you've done that and London, that, London might seem like tough. But for me, that's the unknown.
Yeah.
And again, because you've got the experience of going through that, you know what it was like each day. I can only compare to running through London, which I thought was really fucking boring. And also, because I went back and forth on certain bits, London's generically pretty flat. There are some areas where there's some hills, but it's just like the mundaneness of it. And I imagine, I guess, with the desert and the Arctic, there's not a lot to look at.
No.
But it's really interesting that you have that, and that's something that only you will really have. I imagine a lot of people are like me and be like, no, I would much rather run around London than the desert. And partly that could also be because it's not just the unknown of the environment, it's the unknown of the brain. Because again, where I asked you, where did your brain go when you're in the Arctic? I know where my brain would go if I'm running around London. I'm going to be looking to distract myself. I'm going to be trying to count how many Tesco Expresses I see.
Yeah.
That kind of thing while I'm on the run, where you don't have that.
Yeah.
Was it the same in terms of your mentality then? Obviously, you said you had to rely on it a lot because you're self-sufficient, but was it just a process of one foot in front of the other? Or were there other things going on because of temperatures, sunburn, all this sort of thing?
Do you know what? I think when you're out there, because like a lot of the trivial stuff, there's no phone signal, like you're not on your phone and you're pretty disconnected, like technological, like as in you got none of that. But then also you're not always talking to people the whole time, especially in the Arctic. I think I spoke a couple of times to a few people and that was it. But I think you kind of subconsciously, you're making decisions about things in life, like maybe where you want to go, what you want to do next, and like almost making quite important decisions, like about things I couldn't sit here and describe and say, when I got back, I had all these decisions made. But I think you have a lot of time to think about the things that are important to you. So when you come out of it, I definitely always feel like mentally I'm tired, but I feel like I've got a very clear direction on where I'm going or what I want to be doing. So I think when you're going around, you're having those hard conversations with yourself because you can't avoid it basically, because you're not sat, you're running around and there's not these trivial things taking over your mind, which in truth, most of your stresses probably come from something a bit bigger than, I missed my train. Yeah, that's annoying. But if you get really upset about it, like today, even coming here, I missed the train and it just affected me more than normal. I was like, normally I just go, oh, okay, I'll get the next one. But I was like, it's because, you're tired and it's probably whatever. But my point is sometimes they're bigger questions. I think when you're out doing those things, you kind of have time to think about them.
Cool. Okay. And on questions, we have a good section of this podcast where the listeners can get involved. So we've got some listener questions for you. People take the opportunity to just ask something that they're interested in, or maybe something that can guide them themselves.
Yeah.
So the first question is from Mike, and Mike wants to know, what's worse, being too hot or too cold? And in brackets, there was sand versus snow. Just again, before you go into the answer for that, I immediately, when I read that question, thought to hardest geezer running in goggles because of the sandstorms and that sort of thing. But just him complaining about how sand gets everywhere.
Yeah.
I think I'm on team snow for that reason, but I am obviously, I've never dealt with the fear of frostbite or anything. What's your preference?
So I'm going to answer the question, but I think the main thing I'd say is I felt safer being in too hot than in too cold. And I think with too hot, bearing in mind, it probably, if it was like 50, 60 degrees, maybe it'd be different, but it was about 40, 45. But when you're too hot, like if you stop, you'll start you do start cooling down if you've been running. The problem with the Arctic was it was so cold that you couldn't stop. So there's kind of this slight difference where with the Arctic, I couldn't really warm up. And if I stopped moving, frostbite territory straight away. So in regards to how my events actually fell, I preferred the desert and the sand to like the snow and the Arctic. But whether the Arctic being slightly warmer and the desert being, like ridiculously hotter, it may have changed. And then the Arctic, no dramas with my feet, a couple of blisters, but the desert, like the sand, even though you try and stop it, it still gets in your shoes. So I, probably preferred running on snow than the desert. It's kind of slight. It's answer the question, but do you know what I mean? It's not as
clear cut.
Yeah, it's not as clear cut.
I get that. That's all right. Then I've got the next question is from Alice. So what are the biggest lessons learned that you found applicable to everyday life?
I think commitment to yourself. So I think it goes for anything. So if you say, for example, it's like if I said to you, I'm going to be here for this podcast, it's like you commit that to yourself and then you be there for the podcast and you show up for you. So like if I'm going to go to the gym, you say you're going to go to the gym, go to the gym. And I think I was thinking about it again, going around. It's like with all the training's not just about physically getting fitter, but it's making that like unwavering commitment to yourself that you are going to show up when you say you're going to show up. And I think if you go into, let's say it's always okay to miss sessions. I'm not saying that, but I think, if you miss a session because like for a reason that you genuinely believe, like I'm not up for it today, I'm normally really good, then fair enough. But if you're constantly, missing sessions and just chilling it off, when it comes to race day, you're probably not going to go in there thinking, I'm really confident I'm going to finish it because I've committed to everything. I've followed this. Do you know what I mean? So I think in terms of lessons, it's like if you commit to a business project or like with your uni thing, it's like, I'm going to finish my dissertation by X date and I'm going to do this much a day. You start just chilling it off and not doing it. When it comes to like, the final bit of it, it's like, are you really going to follow through? And you're going to have those doubts because there's nothing to say you are going to follow it through because the whole time you've been chilling it off. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's almost it's quite similar to when Alex Hormozy was talking about how preparation for anything is just the creation of an undeniable list of sort of reasons that you are good at something and you're going to achieve something, and that's ultimately
and that you are who you are,
and that you are who you are. So like when you get to the moment, there's as little doubt as possible because you can turn around and you can look at this list of things that you have done. I've done all of this. There is no reason based on that I should struggle with this. And don't get me wrong, in the world of performance, there are many reasons you can't account for that on the day, all of a sudden you have an injury. It can happen, but it's better to go in fundamentally prepared and have ticked as many boxes as you can going into it than to not.
And just on that, like I'm a huge fan of Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson. I've seen his Alex Hormozy, and I think there's two kind of quotes, and I'm not sure if it's from him, either of them specifically, but definitely came up on their show. And one's like, not making a decision is still a decision. And I think that's really key because you might go, I can't decide whether to commit to that Ironman. I can't decide whether to commit to it. Like, because it might be, you don't think you're fit enough, or you don't think you have enough time, or you don't have this. And obviously it could be like financial, and that's like, if you can't at the current time afford to, that, that's obviously a fair enough reason. But if it's like, I don't think I can do the training, I don't think this, and you can't make the decision, you're making a decision, not, you know what I mean, not to do it. And that's still a decision. So like, if you're still undecided, it's like, my then second bit of advice would be, you're guaranteed to fail if you don't have a go. So you might do your first Ironman or try your first Ironman and DNF, but you had a go. To even step up to have a go at an Ironman is impressive, So those two things definitely always stick out to me. It's like, if I don't have a go at this, guaranteed to fail. Like, you're definitely not going to succeed. But if you have a go, there's always a chance that it could be better than you expected. And actually come race day, you might, with 2 months training or 3 months or however long it is, you might actually surprise yourself.
I think as well, the more people that you meet that do these events, you'll actually realize that there's a lot of, quote unquote, normal people. And at the end of the day, a lot of people that have done these events, I don't know if you share the same mentality, will turn around and be like, yeah, no, it is doable.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not that special. It is doable. I think with your case, it's obviously very severe. I think there are people that may not be able to do it, but there's this level of, I just committed. Like I just did it. At the end of the day, I woke up that morning and I just started. And ultimately, all you've got to do is get yourself to that point. And if that means booking the half marathon, even though you've never run a 5K without walking before, ultimately, are you ever going to be able to run the 5K without walking before? If you don't book the half marathon, you need that thing, and you'll only ever be able to do it if you commit to it and you book it. So fuck around and find out.
I think that's the other thing, like just on what you were saying, is like, I appreciate some of them are extreme, and like, if you don't run, you're probably not going to be able to do a 250k ultramarathon. Like, I get that. But I think the other thing is, if I said to someone, like, I don't want to be like morbid, but it's almost like this is you have to do it. Like, you have to do it. I'm sure a lot of people would get through it. If you really knew you like had to finish it, then I think a lot more people would be able to do it. But yeah, you're right. If the absolute extremities, obviously you've got to have some sort of baseline. But if you grew up playing sports and you run and you keep yourself fit and active, you'd be surprised once with a couple of months training on anything how far you can actually take yourself.
Okay. So the last question I've got, I'm actually going to keep anonymous because I know this person and I want to give some context to their question. Now, obviously, you've done some crazy challenges, but their question is, what was the most challenging part of the full Ironman? And the reason they've asked that question is I think they are at a point where they're considering doing one and trying something very, very challenging, that they've sort of pushing the boat out in. They've done all of those things before in their life, but putting them all together on an event and a stage like an Ironman is obviously a big challenge to them. What was the most challenging part of that full Ironman?
So obviously, like, for me, the bike is, I bought a road bike the day after I signed up to do the Ironman. So it wasn't like I was an experienced cyclist. I've literally, when I was a kid, I went out on a bike, but that's not road cycling. I mean, it's a different sport. So physically, the bike was the hardest bit. That's probably why I clocked up so many kilometers in preparation. But actually, for me, it was getting a puncture during the race. I'd messed around like trying to fix a puncture. I didn't have full confidence that, you're sweating, you're tired, that I was going to be able, and it sounds really weird, but it's things that almost, I don't want to say out of your control, but there's going to be a marathon, there's the bike, there's the physical component. But some people, it's just like the chain on their bike falls off. And that's the end of and after all that time and effort, it's like, if you don't know how to fix that, I didn't know how to fix a chain, I'll be honest. I got lucky. Some people get unlucky. You might carry 2 spare inner tubes, to which, like, if you get a puncture, that's the thing you might potentially change. Some people get 3 punctures. It's like, it's just unlucky. And I think my fear in all of it was like, if I give up or decide not, I go, going to fucking throw in the towel, I'm done. That's on me. But, if I got 3 punctures and I only had 2, that's where you're like, oh, this is...
It wasn't for you.
It wasn't for you. It wasn't meant to be that day. So I think that mentally going into it, kind of the bike in and of itself physically, but also, mechanically, if something goes wrong, like the brakes stop working. I'm not an expert in bike mechanics. And in hindsight, and anyone who is going to maybe think about doing it, I'd make sure you know how to fix your bike, because there's not like mechanics who are just going to be there and do the punk. You need to know how to do it. And yeah, I think that's probably...
That's good advice. It's good advice. So that moves us on to a bit more of advice for yourself. So this section, the 3 pieces of advice section, those that have listened before, I'm sure you're very familiar. I want you to imagine that I'm not here now.
Yeah.
And I am replaced with a younger version of yourself. Okay, so this is direct advice to a younger version of yourself. Now, because it's 3 pieces of advice, they don't all have to be the same age.
Yeah.
There'll be different points in your life. But what are 3 pieces of advice you would give yourself?
I think one of the key ones I've realised over the last couple of years is, like, growing up, like being a kid in the UK, or not kid, like, when you're going through the end of school, like, and going to university and stuff, drinking culture is massive in the UK. It just is. Like, a lot of people drink, especially like Freshers Week's renowned, for example, drinking. And like, I've done that. I've been like, I was drinking and like stuff like that. But what I've realised is, if you've got certain goals you want to hit, you spend, let's say at uni, you go out twice a week and that's 2 days hungover, you lose your rhythm. Like, I always found, like, I could do 2 weeks of really good, productive gym sessions, work, go for a night out, and it would take me 2, 3, maybe even 4 days to kind of get my mojo back and like catch up on that sleep. So I think for like a kind of late teens, early 20s self, it would be like, enjoy yourself, but know that you're sacrificing reaching goals, because you can't do, like, I think last year I had 9 months without alcohol, which was a long time, but blimey, like, I got a lot more done, and I stayed in this, especially mentally, this stable just rhythm. Like, I didn't, there's no real like, not that there wasn't loads of real highs, but I mean, there's no real lows. There wasn't like, you know, sometimes after a night out you wake up and it's, you know, it's chemically, you're very down, you're maybe a bit anxious, those kind of things. So that would be the first bit of advice. Second one to a younger self would be as well, is like, as long as you're doing your best, like you're putting in your genuine best effort, you know, don't try not to get too upset with yourself, because there are people out there who are just going to be better than you at whatever it is. Like, there will be someone who can do an Ironman with like not even any training and do it in like sub 10 or something. You know what I mean? Like, there will be people who are better than you, and you just can't compare yourself to them, because everyone's on their own pathway. Like, if I said to myself like 3 years ago I'd be in this position now and have done some of these things, like I would have laughed. I would have been like, no way. So I guess it's one of those things where it's like, everyone's different, so we're all going to naturally slightly compare ourselves. And at times it's good, because if you see someone do this, you might think, oh, I'd like to do that, and you're comparing. But at the same time, everyone's on their own path, and you might just be a year off going exactly where you want. So that's the second bit as such. And I think the third is, always, in terms of like comparison, try and not necessarily just hang out with people, but talk to people who have done stuff you want to do. Because more often than not, like I've found, especially leading up to Ironman, Marathon Des Sables, Arctic, any of these things, if you find people who have done it and will give you advice, you know, that gap of impossibility becomes a lot smaller, because you realize it's like, could be who X, and they've got a normal life, they do normal things, they train, but they, you know, they have time with their family. You don't have to be like this superhuman, like, freak to get those things done. So I definitely say, whatever you want to do, whether it's business or like, let's say it's even at uni, you're a first year and you want to end up in X job. It's like, find that person and just kind of ask them for advice. What did they do? You don't have to do the same thing, but again, it's like, seek out positive role models for yourself and where you want to go, and not like where your parents want you to go. It's like where you want to go.
It's amazing. Yeah. I'm going to ask an extra bonus question, actually. I did this with Leo.
Special bonus question?
Yeah, special bonus question to this segment. So I did this with Leo a few episodes ago, because this guy he's 21. He's achieved a lot. He's doing a lot. But obviously being so young, it's difficult sometimes to think of 3 bits of advice. You've smashed it there. But I'd be interested to know, because you're also, you know, 23. There's a lot of life ahead of you. If you could give yourself one piece of advice for future you, what would it be?
I'd probably say it's, with anything in life, it's like, it's great to do these things, but it requires a lot of sacrifice. And I think it's always like, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, in terms of make sure you're doing it still because you enjoy it and you want the challenge, and don't end up doing it because you think you've got to maintain the, you know, like, I'm the person who does ultras and I need to keep doing, like, when I stop enjoying it, that's when I need to just, you know, call it a day. And I think with everything, it's like, even with rugby, it's like, there was moments where I was really falling out of love with it, you know, maybe not quite getting through trials I wanted to, and maybe not enjoying it, and it's like, not that I should have walked away, but it's just make sure you're doing the things because you want to do them. And it's not like you're thinking other people are like, you're the guy who plays rugby, or you're the guy who does this, so you need to keep doing it. And I think that's a big one. Like with these ultras, I've really enjoyed doing it. I've learned a lot about myself, and I'm, to be honest, like, I'm already looking, you know, ahead to want to do more. And that's great, because I know I'm doing it because I want to do it. And that's, you know, no one said, right, in 6 months you need to do this ultra. You know what I mean? It is on my own volition to choose that. So yeah, that's probably something I'd...
Cool. Well adjusted to the spanner thrown in the works. I have pretty much a final question from someone else at this point, which is the previous guest.
Yeah.
So Archie was the last guest, and his question is, what is the most interesting thing happening in your life right now? Now, we've obviously spoken a lot about Project Extreme.
Yeah.
I would argue that's pretty interesting. But is there anything else that you can mention that you have happening right now?
I'll be honest, I'm looking, like, right now, my life's looking a lot more relaxed, and it's not boring, but, you know, more normal, like, things. Obviously, I'm starting on my regular commissioning course, so going to Sandhurst to do that. So that's going to be interesting, exciting, fun, and kind of start the next chapter for me. But beyond that, yeah, I get, like, again, I'm just a normal person who's done, you know, a few of these things, but I'm no different to everyone else. Like, today, it's just back into the usual Saturday of like meeting a couple of friends, going for a coffee, like I'm going for my mate's birthday dinner. Do you know what I mean? That's just what, it's not all like get home and then I'm going to just be, I don't know, doing recovery all day long and not going out and seeing. It's like back to normal life, I guess.
What I love is that, again, it's kind of going back to, because you've done these things, it's like, I'm a normal person, asterisk, 200 kilometers through the Arctic Circle, 252 kilometers through the desert, within the space of about a month and a half of each other this year. Ironman, half Ironman. So that's where I'd put the little asterisk. But I like it. And I think it's good, because the question that I had for you towards the sort of where we are today is the plan recovery?
What is it
at this
currently?
Point? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I'd actually, like physically, like carrying a few, knocks and stuff from it naturally. But I think mentally it's coming out of like a quite a strange place where not only are you in survival mode, but the blinkers are like, you're just so focused. Like you are like each day, all you're thinking about is, right, I'm going to eat and it's the next job. And you come home and suddenly it's like, you don't need to be as focused, but it's quite weird because you're sat there like, there's nothing to meet you like. And I think for me, that's always the harder thing coming out. And you're just suddenly like, whoa, like, it's like you just go, wow, like the world opens back up. So I think it's just like adjusting, going back to normal, seeing friends, just kind of getting used to just being back into and just the last thing on that, I know obviously we talked about these events and the Ironmans and stuff. And why I stress about the normal person is 9 months ago, I was someone who'd like, if you went, have you done any like real fitness? It's like, no. Like naturally, like growing up playing rugby, I'd like love the bleep test, which most people would hate, that kind of thing.
That's weird.
Yeah, that is weird.
That might be the most bizarre thing from our conversation today.
But again, it's because it was like my opportunity to objectively prove yourself. It's like, if you get through that the fastest, you are the fastest. You know what I mean? It's an objective thing. There's no subjectivity. It's like you are either the quickest or you're not the quickest. And like going into these events, it's like there's nothing to say. If I said that was my plan for the next 9 months, most people, maybe some friends would believe them, but you know what I mean? Like most people go, this guy's, even looking on the forum, it's like, I looked up how long to train for a full Ironman, like Google searched it and it was like minimum 12 months, minimum a year and a half, minimum 8, I was like, oh, wow, like have I really messed this up? And I'm not saying it's optimal to try and do it in 3 months. I'm not saying that, and you're probably not going to set a PB, but it's possible. And for me, it was like, a lot more of it is mental than physical. And, your mind controls where your body goes. Like if you say to your body, you need to keep going, I think you'd be surprised. You don't even have to you could just go out say to yourself, I'm going to do a 20K walk and push yourself 5 more and then 5 more. And you'll be, by the end, you're like, I've done a marathon. I was only going to do that. Obviously injuries and stuff aside. But my point is like, I'm still a normal person, like hang out and just like everyone else does day to day. But occasionally we'll have to up the ante and but
awesome. Now, Project Extreme Balls is pretty extreme, but it's a charitable cause.
Yeah.
So, where can the lovely listeners find you and the cause in order to do their bit as well, and also keep an eye on whatever else you end up throwing into it?
Yeah. So the Instagram handle for the page, I think it's project_extreme_balls, and in the bio is like a Just Giving link. So I think over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to like taper the page off. Like when I start Sandhurst, like I don't really want to be on social media as much. So if anyone is willing to donate a few quid, it's too good. Obviously all charity causes are good, but I think for me personally, they're 2 important ones and everyone's been very supportive and donated towards them. And yeah, that would be great. So that's the Instagram handle. And then the Just Giving page is Project Extreme Balls as well. So hopefully quite easy to find.
Fantastic. So it's also worth me mentioning that I will try and be a good host and good editor, so I will make sure that they are in the bio and everything like that, so people can find it easily. So cheers, guys, if you're listening, just scroll down, and while you're scrolling down, hit subscribe, hit follow, and you can find all our social media for the Mindsets Podcast at Mindsets_podcast. That goes for everything. And like I said, please do feel free to share, follow, like, and that's not just for me, it's so that we can share stories like this, we can raise awareness for these different things that are going on, and ultimately cause a big impact in the sort of fitness, well-being, mental health environment. That's the whole purpose of this. So I want to say a massive thank you for joining me and telling me the story about those ultras, so I never personally have to do them, but hopefully inspiring other people. And again, never say never, but potentially inspiring me to do something similar in the future. So yeah, a massive thank you for coming on.
Well, mate, thanks for having me. And like, to be honest, the main reason I've obviously watched some of the clips on Instagram and stuff, and you've had some really good guests. But for me, it's like the main thing is to come on and kind of try and hopefully say to people, like, give it a crack. You know, like, they're not superhuman people doing it. I'm not. I'm just like, again, normal person who's pushed themselves out of a comfort zone and just kept going and going and going. And like, it could be anyone listening to this. They're more like everyone's capable of pushing themselves out of it. So hopefully if one person from this will go, I'm going to do X event now because of that, then job done, mission achieved.
Well, there we go. If you're listening to this, hopefully you can be that one person. And either way, I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.